Hey, everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's me, Diana Perry Cruz.
And
sitting very close to you.
You are very close. And it's me, Jackie, not Perry Cruz McDonald. That should be my name now. And I'm going to change my middle name to not Perry Cruz.
To not, yeah.
And I'm far away from you. I'm 3.5 miles away from you today.
Very far.
Very far. We live very close.
It's very true.
Yeah.
And if anyone noticed, I did stumble at the beginning. For some reason, I wanted to say I was my host, which doesn't make sense. But, you know, it's our podcast and your podcast to listen to about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and discuss it at length, as well as some relevant research articles. And the episode we're going to do today is very different. I think we're going down the list of what are episodes that we've never done before. And this one definitely cropped to the top, which is predicting and preventing mass shootings. Now, this stems from the work of a fabulous guest that we have on as well, but a little backstory. I saw our guest at this year's BABAT conference, and I was able to fill out my bingo card of topics I didn't think I was going to see at the BABAT conference. So I was very excited to mark that one off. And after seeing it, it was just one of those topics of, yes, this is socially important. This should definitely falls under the realm of behavior analysis. I can't believe we don't have more about this topic. So we're very excited to talk with Dr. James Meindl about this today. James, did I get it right? Or did I said I was going to get it at the beginning of the show, and then did I say it right, or am I off?
No, you're good. But I have moved on from correcting anybody in my life anymore.
All right. Dr. James Meindl, thank you so much for coming on the show to talk to us about this topic. We're very excited to have you here.
Thanks. I'm very excited to be here and happy to speak with y'all today.
Beautiful. So again, when we think of behavior analysts and we think of all the fields that we as professionals have moved into, this is not one that I think most of us had even thought of kind of as a topic of interest or as a research topic even. I'd love to hear a little bit about yourself and then how you became interested in researching this topic of predicting, preventing mass shootings.
Sure. So most people in behavior analysis, I kind of stumbled into the field. I answered it when I was an undergrad, answered a flyer on a bulletin board, started working with a family, really just lucked out with this family because they were flying in behavior analysts. And this is back in, 1999. And they were flying in behavior analysts to come and train the team. And so I got off to a very, very good, strong start, meeting with people whose names I didn't know at the time, but in hindsight, I'm thinking like, wow, I can't believe I got to have a one-on-one with this person in a basement of a family's house. Still work with that family now, which is also a luxury in and of itself, to be able to work with the same family. But was immediately enamored with behavior analysis. I was a psych undergrad, but behavior analysis just sort of gelled. Everything kind of clicked together, and then went and got my master's at Penn State, where I worked very closely with Richard Fox. And then after I graduated, continued to work with Richard Fox on various cases in the area, which was also a luxury and really got me into, a focus on more severe behaviors, just because that was really what Richard did very well, was severe behaviors. And just a sort of attitude of like, there wasn't any behavior that we couldn't do something to improve. And I really liked that. And then I got my doctorate at The Ohio State University with Nancy Neef, who brought this very intense focus on, yes, you can change the behavior, but you also need to be able to very clearly explain why it changed. And so I feel like those two experiences working with Richard and Nancy kind of brought me to an interest in really severe behaviors, and also like an intense desire to explain it as best I could, not just to change it, not just, yeah, we did it, we don't exactly know what changed, but why exactly, and as precisely as I can explain it, why did behavior change? And then I also am a pretty staunch contrarian, so I have this sort of motivation to not be satisfied with an explanation that's put forth, even if it's fairly good, to think, no, there's got to be a better explanation, or there's got to be something wrong, even if there's not. And and that kind of brought me to mass shootings. At the time that I got interested in this, I was listening to the news a lot, mass shootings, and man, I thought they're really heaping a lot of attention on these people. They're saying their name, and I'm hearing their name and seeing their faces for days and days and days. And if they left something, geez, they're not, either it's going to be published online. I just thought, wow, that's a lot of attention, and maybe that factors in. And so I started looking a little bit into sort of how might media influence mass shootings, and had a few papers on that topic, but then thought, that's just one small aspect. It's a very complex behavior. There's more than just, the media talked about it, so someone went and committed a mass shooting. What are those other explanations? And I couldn't find them to my satisfaction. So I thought, well, I'll try to contribute what I can. And that's why we're speaking today.
All right.
I can say it's so impressive, right? Because when I come across those very complex behaviors and I'm like, oh, here's one reason why. And then here are other reasons why, I want to just be like, and then quietly close the backpack and paddle it up and put it aside. So very commendable that you were like, okay, I'm going to do this. Right? Because that seems scary to me anyway.
I mean, I feel like it's almost like a luxury of being a professor is you get to, you're like, I'm, even if I should be doing some other things, I can think I'm being paid to do this. I'm supposed to do this. Yes. If I sit here for 2 hours and I don't come up with the answer, that's time well spent. That's right. What they're paying me to do. That's kind of how I justify it to myself.
Got to answer those tough questions as a professor, just sit and stare into space and.
Yeah, right.
I need to find my tough question then, as I spiral now into my life of uncertainty.
Well, we have 2 articles that we'll be discussing today. Diana, please tell us what we'll be talking about.
Sure. These articles are both provided to us by Dr. Meindl, and they are titled Reducing Media-Induced Mass Killings, Lessons from Suicide Prevention by Meindl and Ivy, and published in American Behavioral Scientist 2018. And also, Toward a Functional Account of Mass Shooting, Prediction and Influence of Violent Behavior by Meindl, Ivy, Delgado, and Swafford. And that is currently under review.
So, James, one of the things sometimes, when we have episodes on the show, they're follow-up episodes or they're episodes extending the task list. So we sort of get right into the topic. Since we have never talked about mass shootings on the show before, and for many folks, it may just be, a headline that tragically they've seen way too often in the past and maybe not thought too much of it other than, oh, this is really sad. I'd love to do a little kind of background information as to sort of what we know about mass shootings and sort of what other fields have been sort of doing in terms of mass shooting, that same work of predicting the mass shooting, maybe preventing mass shooting. So I guess first, I would love to, because I think you and your co-authors bring this up and do a really nice job of sort of describing one of the key tragedies that makes mass shooting very different than a lot of other violent crimes that we have in this country. So certainly, we have robberies, there's murders, and those can be very, those are very awful, very traumatic for individuals. But there's something about mass shootings that just almost feels overwhelming when you hear about it. So, I mean, the idea that you could then continue to think about the topic for as long as you have must take a lot of, I assume takes a lot of fortitude, because it is just feels like such a big T tragedy. But could you talk a little bit more about sort of just how impactful mass shootings can be, and possibly why so many people kind of don't want to touch the topic?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if this is why people don't want to touch the topic, but I mean, I think a reason that a mass shooting, at least to me, stands out, and why, it is such as big a tragedy as it is compared to another event where just as many people died, like criminal activity or something along those lines, is that there's often not this very clear idea of why the person did what they did. If it's criminal activity, that like this was a drug deal gone wrong. Mm-hmm. You get why someone did that. Even if it was someone, had been fighting with, their spouse for a long period of time and then killed the person. I feel like just, from a very non-behavioral perspective, you get it. You understand like, okay, that was the motivation and that's why they did. They shouldn't have done it, but that's why they did it. And I feel like with a lot of mass shootings, it's not quite as clear why someone did the thing that they did. And as a result of that, it's really hard to predict when and where it's going to happen. If I'm in a city with a lot of crime, you kind of know the areas where there's crime. And when there's crime there, you kind of expected that there was going to be some crime there. But I feel like a mass shooting kind of violates those rules that we've all sort of self-generated or been told about. This is why people kill other people. Yeah. So, and then I also think there is, a lot of mass shooters don't survive the encounter. Maybe half of them don't survive the encounter. Either they kill themselves or they are kind of going in to be killed by police. So then you also are set with this, if it was a criminal activity, yeah, they were trying to get money. And whether they got it or not, that's the clear, tangible outcome of their behavior they were sort of going after, again, in a non-behavioral sort of framework. But with a mass shooting, the person's going in to kill people and then die in the act. You kind of have this, well, there's not even this tangible outcome that they're getting because they're not going to experience it. So to me, that adds like another wrinkle to it. They wanted to go in, kill people, and then die in the act. And so I think that makes it a little bit tricky just to understand and analyze. And I also think it makes it a thornier issue for people or a more tragic issue because people can't make sense of why it happened.
Mm. When we look at statistics these days in terms of, how prevalent mass shootings are, at least in the United States, do you mind sharing some more hard facts? Because I feel like mass shootings are one of those things of we all probably can remember a mass shooting from within our lifetime that probably was the most salient, maybe based on our age. Maybe we knew someone who lived in the area of the shooting or potentially knew someone who was affected directly by the shooting. And then we just sort of see so many like just horrible, tragic statistics every week. So I think it makes it hard to know like how often is this happening?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer in general because the definitions of what a mass shooting is, there's a lot of different definitions. And so there's a bunch of databases that track mass shootings, but they're all using different databases. And some will say, there were 10 this year, and some will say there were 174 this year. And again, it goes back to what we were saying. Some include criminal activity. Some will include the person went to go kill a bunch of people, but then maybe was thwarted and didn't kill anybody. So what I base most of the research that I'm doing is on what's called the Mother Jones database. And their definition is, to me, when we're talking about mass shooting, all of the people that are listening right now, I'm assuming they have in their mind, someone went in, they killed a bunch of people that seemed to be somewhat random to the person. They were just people that happened to be there right now. Maybe the person killed themselves in the act or died, but that's not included in the number. And that it all happened at once. It wasn't someone that killed somebody and then 2 months later killed another person, and total it added up to a bunch of people. And that's what the Mother Jones database is looking at. It's those 3 or more people died, doesn't include the shooter. It happened in a public place. It all happened in one setting. Those mass shootings have been increasing. So their database goes back to the early 80s. And, during the 80s and the 90s, the early 2000s, you're averaging like 2 a year, 2 of those, and 2 and some change of those types of mass shootings per year. And then there's this massive bump that happens towards the late, 2000s till now, where you're averaging, almost 7 a year, which is a pretty big increase from 2. So that doesn't include any criminal activity. That is, there's probably mass shooting events that aren't included in that we might say, yeah, that kind of counts. But in general, there seems to be an increase in what's in the number of mass shootings that across the decades. And that's happened fairly recently where we've seen that rise.
So the fact that we've been seeing a rise in the number of mass shootings, it's not necessarily going to be due to the fact that everyone just sort of assumed these will never happen again and we've ignored the problem. I mean, I know you mentioned a lot of individuals who are actively, working on the problem, policymakers, various change agents. Sort of what is the typical kind of mass shooting response in terms of there's a mass shooting, here's what our fields know, here's what other fields know, here's what they're bringing to the discussion, here are changes we've seen societally, if any. I mean, kind of what's this sort of status quo of our response as not exactly a country, but the individuals who sort of support this, hopefully a decrease in this violence.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone would like to. Everyone's working towards how do we prevent this? How do we stop this? So the general strategies that people have taken, if a mass shooting occurs after the fact, people will talk about, mental illness. So the person had a mental illness, and often the feeling I get is, you can say they had a mental illness and let's just end it there. That explained why, which I think, as behaviorists, we would say that's not a great explanation. That doesn't really help.
Function was crazy person. There you go. We did it. Yeah, not. Yeah,
they snapped. Oh, they snapped. Okay,
it happens. Oh well,
it happens. I hope it doesn't happen again. But they take the approach of placing the blame kind of inside the individual. It's, well, there was something about that person. We might not know exactly what it is, but there was something within that person that caused that problem, whether it be a mental illness or something vague like they had, issues with anger. And then that doesn't really explain things. But so there's that. There's debates on, gun rights versus gun control. That's going to come up every single time. And I'm not saying that that's not a good debate to have, but that's just often an approach. And, we've seen kind of what the debate comes up and then it kind of goes away, and not a lot is changing in that area. A lot focuses on sort of strengthening security. So how can we get better trainings in schools? What are active shooter drills going to look like? How do we build, structures that look inviting but are actually make this place a harder place to go in and shoot a lot of people? What does that look like? Researchers in the area, from all the research that I've consumed, what they tend to do is they create profiles of the individual. What does the person look like? They'll categorize the individual based on sort of the topography of what they did. So, if someone is categorized as, a pseudo commando, they came in with a lot of weapons and a good plan for how to kill a lot of people. They don't have any escape plan involved. So that doesn't explain the behavior, but it kind of lumps together different mass shooters that are sort of engaging in topographically similar behaviors. And then there's a lot of theories. Everyone wants to have an explanation of why. And, there's theories for, the person's got a desire for dominance, or theories that, there was a developmental issues and the person never learned how to kind of cope with adversity. And so they engaged in this dysfunctional response. And I don't want to say that those are, I don't want to say that any of the approaches, let's debate gun control versus gun rights, or let's talk about involvement in mental illness or strengthening security, or even the theories that are out there that are kind of from other perspectives. I don't want to say that any of that is wrong work. But I think from a behavioral standpoint, it falls short of at least what we want to do. And in my mind, and something that drives a lot of the kind of work that I do now is, we've got goals in our field, that are to predict and influence behavior. And in my mind, those approaches at best help us to predict behavior. If you find that there is some relation between mental illness and a mass shooting, and it's a questionable whether that relation exists, but let's say for argument's sake, you find that. That still doesn't explain why the person did it. It just shows people who are likely to engage in this behavior are also likely to engage in this other behavior, but nothing about why. Profiling is the same thing. People who, are of this age and are of this sort of background and have these sorts of interests are, they're what mass shooters tend to look like. So if we have someone like that, it helps us maybe predict that a mass shooting is a little bit more likely. But none of those explanations tell us what to do about it. They don't get to the influence part. And so that's where I really think, that's what got me excited was, we need our analysis. It's not just, they've got a good analysis, but we've got our own analysis. And so, how do you like that? I feel like the world needs a behavioral analysis because we're not satisfied to stop at the level of prediction. We got to get to, what are actual manipulable variables in the world that are responsible for this behavior, at least in part, because then we can do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is a horrible tragedy that is continually occurring almost exclusively in our country. And I think that anything that we can do to make this happen less often is absolutely, I'll take it, right? Like, I welcome any approach. And some of the other things that you're talking about, I think, are very important as well. But you're right. If you're trying to get down to how to influence future occurrences, this is a really critical piece when we're looking at it from the level of the individual or the behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the strengthening security, it's not a bad, put
I'll take it all.
Film on windows that prevents bullets from going through. That makes a lot of sense to do it. It's just, it tells us zero about why somebody did it. If I found, a good solution if someone's aggressive is to handcuff them, that works.
Right.
It definitely works. They stop being aggressive, but because they can't, not
right.
because I've understood anything about why they were aggressive to begin with.
Mm.
Yeah.
Similarly, I think the idea of a lot of what you described as sort of what the current profiling practices might be, I mean, that doesn't necessarily narrow it down. I bet there's someone who's like, how do we use AI to solve this problem? Which I suppose you could look at tons of data as to these are some of the similarities, and you could, use that information.
Good.
And you could use that information to say, okay, well, let's keep an eye on these people until they do something that seems suspicious. I mean, you're right. There's no sense of like, what then? Just get the handcuffs out earlier. It's not really
exactly.
effective.
Exactly. Being able to identify someone who's going to engage in a mass shooting would be tremendously helpful. But first, we then have to know, what do we do about that? Like, so we found them, well, what do we do? Because just lock them up, that does not really have an explanation. It might stop that person from engaging in a mass shooting, but it doesn't tell us why that person got to that point that whatever our assessment was said, aha, watch out for that person. And as a result, we're just basically waiting for another person to go through the same sort of experiences, get to the same point, and then it's like, we found another one. It doesn't solve the problem, which is why I think we need that influence part. We need to try to understand things to the point that we've identified manipulable variables, things we can do about it to prevent it from getting to that place that point in the first place. But also, if we do find someone, they haven't committed the mass shooting yet. What do we do? How do we make it so that they're not going to at some point in the future?
Mm-hmm.
And I can only imagine that you wouldn't hit all of the people as well, right? Like, somebody will slip through the cracks and commit a mass shooting, and then it'll be on the news, and they're like, but I never thought that neighbor would do that.
Yeah.
They're so kind. They bought me bagels one time, right? Like, That's how it always happens. So I think even if you did that and you were like watching everyone, I don't think it would solve the problem.
Yeah. I agree. Someone's going to slip through the cracks. If you theoretically, if you knew the causes and got rid of the causes, then there's no one that's going to be identified because the variables that got people to that point just aren't in existence.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
you
way
have
down the road, though.
solved world peace.
I don't want to minimize or simplify it. It's a tall order.
Yeah. But when you hear the profile histories, it's not an uncommon experience very often that people have, right? That could lead them down this path. So like there are thousands of people that could meet many of the profile characteristics that could get pinged, right? For ending up in this category. And most people, by and large, by far, do not. So there would be a lot of, what is that? False positives. There we go.
False positive. Yeah. Right. Well, so certainly. So if you were going to have interventions that are only for at risk, if that's where you kind of stopped, is someone's at risk of being a mass shooter, let's put these interventions in, then yeah, you might have lots of people that are in intervention that don't necessarily need to. And now there's kind of a stigma because you were labeled as a potential mass shooter.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like our culture just puts you at risk.
Yeah. Well, and then that would mean, as opposed to waiting for at risk, let's look at some primary interventions where we can sort of change those factors that got the person to even be at risk in the first place.
Yeah.
So, James, I'd love to hear about the conceptualization of this function that you sort of wrote about in, well, one of the papers. The other one sort of gets at some of the media components. Then the one kind of under review really looks at the big picture, because it's not exactly the kind of behavior you can run an FA on. So there's a sense of you can hypothesize, you can make educated guesses, but to get something that feels close to right, or that's factoring in what is known as much as possible, that is talking about a tall order. That also seems like a real tall order. So I'd love to hear about the process.
Yeah. So the way I have approached mass shootings and trying to come up with some, theoretical explanation. I don't have the empirical data. I don't have an experiment that's showing that the things I'm hypothesizing are absolutely the causes. But the way I looked at it was all of that research that I talked about that I said just gets at prediction. To me, when they're identifying sort of these behavior patterns that mass shooters engage in, or that are associated with mass shooters. And the specific mass shooters that I was looking at in the paper are kind of a subcategory titled fame-seeking mass shooters, where it seems like these mass shooters are engaging in this behavior because they are motivated by the fame or the infamy that follows. Mm-hmm. They left a manifesto, or they posted to social media, or they have, there's records of them talking about how famous they're going to be after they do this, or something along those lines. So there's research into them that's finding behavior patterns, finding kind of those profiles, those topographical behavior patterns associated with fame-seeking mass shooters. And in my mind, that is sort of a behavior relation. It doesn't explain the behavior, but it's pointing to potential behaviors that might be part of the same broad response class that incorporates a mass shooting. I mean, a mass shooting, it's hard to predict, and it only happens once. The person either dies or is arrested. So there's not going to be any sort of repeated analysis of the mass shooting with this individual. And you can't really do repeated analyses across individuals, because what are you even looking at? How do you even know that it's functioning the same at all? Mm-hmm. But you've got a category that's grouped based on this seeming motivation for fame or infamy. And those behavior patterns, if they're part of the response class, and those behavior patterns are, include, like, there's a lot of social isolation, there's a lot of victimization, there is that motivation for fame, there is indication that they are poor at perspective taking. So if those things are either part of the response class or skill deficits that might, make other contingencies more or less effective. Those things happen well before the mass shooting. Those things happen repeatedly. Those precursor behaviors, behavior patterns that might be part of the same response class, all of those seem a lot more readily analyzed than the one mass shooting, if I put the box around just the actual mass shooting event. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what my analysis is looking at is those and trying to explain, okay, here are patterns that have been identified with these individuals. How could we explain or understand those patterns? What might be maintaining those patterns? This is just theoretical at the moment, but we could go and look at those because those are happening in real time and are repeated. And if they're part of the same response class or are skill deficits that lead to the development of this other behavior, we can change those and prevent the mass shooting from occurring. So that's the analysis that's the approach that I was looking at. And in my paper, I'm looking specifically at the desire for fame or infamy, social isolation, the lack of empathetic behavior / poor perspective taking, and victimization. And then I try to explain how those might contribute to a mass shooting and how all of that, especially the social isolation, kind of creates a behavior trap where the person falls into a cycle of increasingly restricted behavior, restricted reinforcers that are all around sort of mass shooting events, mass shooting types of behavior. And the more isolated they are, the fewer contingencies are pulling their behavior in any direction. And I think what happens is they legitimately get trapped in this where it almost becomes inevitable that they're moving down this path unless something big happens and changes their behavior. So that's the broad approach that I took, was analyzing those precursors, trying to explain how they contribute to a mass shooting, explain how it builds a behavior trap that they get stuck in, and trying to identify manipulable variables at each step of the process so that if we wanted to intervene in any given area, we could.
Hey everyone, sorry to pause the conversation. We're just going to take a little break and we will be right back.
Hi, do you want to be a BCBA, also known as a board certified behavior analyst?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Massachusetts to get your graduate degree, just minutes outside of Boston.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education, dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years.
And our 2022 graduates had a 92% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy approved fieldwork placements, ethics mini handbooks, PhD levels professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland if interested.
And don't forget, our program is accredited by the Association of Behavior Analysis International, or ABAI, as a Tier 1 master's degree program.
Don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu.
regiscollege.edu.
One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there.
Bye.
Hey everybody, sorry to pause our conversation with Dr. Meindl, but I want to remind you all that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved, and by listening, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening, then go to our website, ABA Inside Track, or click the link in your podcast player to go and enter some key information about yourself. We also need to know the identity of 2 secret code words, and these were both graciously shared by Dr. Meindl, but you're going to need to put these in. I'm going to give you the first one of those code words now. It's influence. 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 It's like, how do you define influence? Like there's a movie, Bad Influence, but you could be a good influence on people. I'm looking at Diana. She's not giving me an example, so we'll just leave it there. Influence.
I don't know. You got me all like trying to behaviorally define influence, but I don't have time for this.
No, okay. All right. Let's get back to our discussion with Dr. Meindl. It reads so. I mean, I know, like we talked about how it's not really necessarily possible to test the rightness of any hypothesis, but it reads very. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yep. That sounds right to me as a behavior analyst. I'd love to hear more about some of the work you put into your kind of the overall model, overall hypotheses around relational frame theory, because I think one of the, I don't know if it would be a critique, but I think if the average person is sort of thinking about it, it's going to go back to a lot of sort of mentalistic private events. Some of the ones we talked about at the beginning, like, well, they're snapping, or they can't handle the pressure, all those types of phrases. And I think the way you couch it in the paper really does, look at those, inflexible interests, inflexible patterns of behavior, really restricted interests and reinforcers, how it's, impacted by sort of, future patterns of thought around sort of like media response, other people's responses. I would just kind of love to hear it in your words as well, because I know not everyone is, I'm at the surface of relational frame theory. So I always love it when anyone wants to help me get a little deeper in those discussions.
Well, so let me try to include that, if you don't mind, in sort of the overall trap, because I think here's what's hard. So in my analysis, I'm looking at the contingencies that might be at play for the individual, and also their sort of relational responding repertoire. And it's easy to talk about those things separately, but in reality, I think they're intermeshed. Like a poor relational responding repertoire sets the stage for certain reinforcers or certain stimuli to function as reinforcers or not. So here's kind of what I am seeing generally, and this is where the relational responding fits in as well. So I think what happens, I talked about this behavior trap. A behavior trap largely is, if you think about it, we've got the concept is you've got a trap that's baited, that's pulling people in a certain direction, so they want to engage in this. It's a set of interrelated contingencies that are easy to enter and then hard to get out of. And to me, where you've got some bait, and I don't think my analysis is complete. I think there's way more that I could be included. I've just taken, an initial kind of dip into this, but I'm sure there's other principles that I've left out of the analysis because it's such complex behavior. But you've got a media environment as one component that establishes rules that we're going to at least learn, whether we follow them or not. There are rules that are specifying contingencies, for example, between a mass shooting and fame. And mass shooting is going to make you famous to some degree. Everyone's going to hear your name. If you already have some motivation for fame, it's way easier to become famous if you engage in a mass shooting than if you train to become an athlete, right? Low response effort. Any of you listening, if you've never fired a gun, you could figure it out real fast. It's not hard to do. And then there's some victimization that's also part of setting or baiting the trap, the behavior trap. If you're victimized, if you're experiencing, let's say, bullying in school, the bully's going to acquire some aversive, properties. There's a good chance that could generalize to other people in the school, to school itself. There's going to be more rules you're self-generating about, school being bad and what do you do to bad things? You remove bad things, right? But you've got two EOs. You've got an EO for fame. You've got an EO for the removal of aversive condition, which is the victimizer and anything that is generalized to. Again, it's low effort to enter into this, especially in the beginning, before you've engaged in a mass shooting. It's low response effort to, research online a mass shooter, or to just look at jokes about mass shooting, or look at jokes about getting even with people. That's low response effort. If you're socially isolated, there's not a lot pulling you in other directions. You're not going out with people to do things. You've got this increasingly restricted environment, increasingly restricted reinforcers that are maintaining your behavior I would argue a lot of it, and this seems to be true with a lot of mass shooters online. Again, if you have no social reinforcers, you're not going to stare at a wall. You're going to do something. There's other reinforcers, and the internet is endless. And then there's the perspective taking and the empathetic behavior. And this is, to me, where the derived relational responding is involved. So perspective taking in behavior analysis is otherwise known as sort of deictic relational responding. It's responding that allows me to take somebody else's perspective. If I have a strong deictic relational responding repertoire, which is a mouthful, if I can take your perspective, we'll just do that from now on. If I can take your perspective, then if I saw you get, I don't know, hit with a bat, I will know it hurts. I'll be able to know, well, if I was you, I can shift perspectives. If I was you, it would hurt. And then within relational responding, there's a concept of transformation of stimulus function, which is basically just if stimulus A is more than stimulus B and stimulus A is one shock, then, stimulus A is more aversive than stimulus B, right? B became less aversive. The function was transformed. Well, with perspective taking, the same thing can happen. And not only can I take your perspective, oh, it would hurt, but I might experience some of that. If you said my pet died yesterday, I can take your perspective. And if you don't tell me you're sad, I'll still know you're sad. And I might feel a little sad too. And if you don't have that relational responding repertoire, that's not something mysterious within you. That is just it's a learned skill. It's something that we all acquire, as a learning process. If you don't have that, then you're not really going to be able to take someone else's perspective. And if you can't really take someone else's perspective, I wouldn't expect there to be any transforming functions. I wouldn't expect you to be able to take the perspective of the family of someone you killed. You wouldn't be able to feel sad about that. And if that's the case, then once somebody enters into this trap, they've got nothing pulling them in different directions. They're motivated for fame. They're motivated for the removal of all this aversiveness that's around them. And they can't take anyone else's perspective very well. It's difficult. Then I wouldn't expect there to be many contingencies within that trap that stop me from, let's say, planning out a mass shooting. Any of us that are listening right now that have a strong ability to take perspectives, can take perspectives well. I think if we were imagining killing somebody, you might feel a little repulsed by it. It might feel a little aversive, and you might stop doing it. There's a little punishment involved in engaging that behavior because you're taking someone's perspective. You're able to do that. If you aren't able to do that, then you might be imagining going in and, let's say, shooting up a school. You're not taking anyone else's perspective. There's no really aversive consequences to imagining that while you're planning this out. Instead, you're imagining just from your own perspective. Fame, those people are gone from the environment. And so this is where I think those interrelated contingencies are trapping someone in doing this. And then that poor relational responding repertoire means there's not a lot of punishers for engaging in planning and thinking how you're going to do it and imagining doing it in a better way to kill more people or anything along those lines. So I think they're all kind of connected, but my main point is that we've got a bunch of different things that work together. It's not just individual isolated things that might make somebody a mass shooter. I think you've got a variety of contingencies and events that set a trap, get somebody to enter, and then they stay locked in because of social isolation and poor perspective taking skills.
I think that there is reinforcement too that's coming from that in those planning stages via online community groups as well, right? So it might not just be that they, not everyone maybe can't take someone else's perspective, but maybe they're also getting that some type of social reinforcement, but from other people who are thinking similarly.
Absolutely. I mean, you can easily find communities that you could say, something pretty horrible about killing a bunch of people, and are going to receive nothing but jokes in return, pats on the back. There was a website, 8chan, which is I think it's changed to 8. I don't even want to say it. It's changed to a different website now. It's not Google indexed, but there were several shooters who explicitly talked about that website being part of the radicalization process, right, or live streamed mass shootings there. And, you can just see screenshot. I mean, it's taken down now, but when let's say when Christchurch in New Zealand, when that happened, I was able to find before it was taken down, the not back and forth, but the interaction between all of the commenters in real time about this person. And it is, just praise. It is just, and then praise and who's going to one up it. It's not hard to find that. And so if you were slightly inclined and made even the slightest low effort response of saying oh, we all saw this, someone should go and do this.
Yep.
It's easy to say, and it's going to receive a lot of attention and a lot of praise. And the nature of it is you gotta one up it. You have to be more explicit or, add in, more details in order to keep receiving that same level of praise. So you can see how sort of a verbal repertoire could be shaped through these online communities. And then again, I can't overemphasize, if you're really socially isolated, that's it. That's your world. Yeah. This tight-knit, extremely focused verbal community is the largest source of reinforcement for you. So you could see how someone would be trapped in that and
absolutely
moving down that pathway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
James, I know one of the key components of having a functional conceptualization here would be to improve prevention and prediction, but then also the prevention efforts. And while certainly the patterns you're describing, those patterns, let's say, yep, you got it. That's 100% what's happening in at least these fame cases. A lot of that work would probably need to be ongoing for the individual. They need social supports. So when I think about it in terms of policy, in terms of response effort for decreasing shootings, I'm really struck with, well, what if we just did a better job with media reporting and policing the internet a little bit better, right? I know you bring those up. I'm not saying I just had this idea. Maybe you didn't think of this one, James.
Came to me.
I know you bring it up, but there's a lot of pros and cons there as well as you bring up in terms of how you could use those, at least those two outlets. I'd love to sort of hear kind of the give and take with the media because in your previous article, your older article, it sounds like, and the media solved it. And then flash forward, and then they didn't bother to listen to their own advice, kind of seems to be the message.
And the media is so much more splintered now, which is probably I should probably let Dr. Meindl talk.
Well, no, y'all are right on the money. I think so. To the extent that the media is establishing rules between, mass shooting and fame, if you could change it so that those rules weren't as explicit or that they weren't providing as much fame, it just logically that would go a good ways towards decreasing the likelihood of someone else engaging in a mass shooting. But, if we say the media, I think y'all are the media too. Y'all are part of it, right? You've got legacy media and you've got new media and you got social media and you got all of these different avenues. And I feel like legacy media, those just traditional, newspaper and maybe the radio and stuff like that. I feel like because they're a little bit more sort of monolithic, they can have sort of a uniform, hey, don't make it sensational. Don't say the names, or say it once and then never say it again, stuff like that. But I don't know. I think that there's a lot of people that are consuming much more social media and that has varying rules, it's everyone's at their own little sort of fiefdom. So I think it would be hard to just say, oh, we shouldn't name them and and don't make it sensational. And one of the papers that I give some more specific details, but you could have something like that, but then how do you get people to adopt it? That becomes a little bit trickier because there's got to be incentives. What are the contingencies that are going to get you to do that? So I think that becomes a little bit trickier in terms of how do you police it. And there's kind of ways around it. But also, I don't know if the media just reported it differently, that's going to solve it. And I don't know if there's a way to report it in just the way that is going to make those rules not explicit. I mean, I remember after, I think it was the first paper that y'all were talking about, I had reporters that would contact me and they would say, I don't want to be part of the problem. Like, what do we do? And because nobody wants to be part of that problem. But the solution is like, well, make your story very boring.
Right.
It's a hard sell.
Yeah.
Could you put yourself more out of business than you already are by being a newspaper reporter? Could you help?
Yeah. So I think that's part of the solution. But if the behavior trap is correct, all that's really doing is establishing some rules. There's still the motivations are there, and the EOs for the removal of the aversive conditions are still there. So a lot of the variables are still present, but the mass shooting being a quick way to establish some fame, at the very least, we could try to minimize that. And again, legacy media seems to be quicker to kind of adopt that because they can just say to their reporters, do it like this, and people will do that. Getting social media to have some sort of safeguards would be a lot harder to do, I think.
So I sort of, and you mentioned some of these points in the article as well, but certainly in terms of like a more broad anti-mass killing campaign, I know educational campaigns are sort of a mixed bag. They don't often do very much, but I'm sort of wondering if this is similar to, say, when they started having some lawsuits around influencers who didn't realize, and it seemed like they just didn't realize that when they're sitting there telling everyone, hey, this product that company X sent me, and I'm telling you is a great product because I want them to send me more products. They didn't realize, or some of them at least didn't realize, they were advertising, and therefore there were certain rules they were supposed to be following that they weren't. And then many of them now are either, very clearly saying, hey, everybody, I am a shill. You can still watch my videos if you want to. And then at least there's some information there. Is there something there in terms of like, what else do we need to know to sort of do like a blanket campaign of like, hey, if you're on social media and you are following these rules, you have no incentive, like the papers do. Like, there's no incentive for you to just, do whatever you want to do any of this. However, we're letting you know when you name mass shooters, when you repost, when you speak positively, you are part of the problem in a way that maybe people don't think about themselves. Well, everybody does it, right? I'm guessing that's probably the attitude. I mean, is there any reason to think that might be a step to take, or there's just not enough information to know whether that would move the needle?
I think so. I do think that the media is involved. I do think that we could, just in terms of setting up the rules, I do think that there's ways to incentivize social media outlets to at least have some sort of guidance on how to post this information. Because I think a lot of people that are involved in posting and reposting, I don't think it's coming from a bad place. I think that they're oblivious to the fact that, like, yeah, you're part of making this person famous. So I think you could do that. What is not as clear is whether that alone would solve things, right? I mean, if there is evidence that sort of in suicide, for example, that if people are reporting sensationally how a celebrity committed suicide, that it increases the likelihood that other people are going to do that. And there's pretty clear guidelines on not reporting in that way. And there seems to be some data to suggest that not reporting in that way decreases the likelihood of sort of imitational people committing suicide in the same way. But it doesn't mean that like that was the solution. And there's a lot of anti-suicide campaigns that have questionable effectiveness. So, I think it would help. I don't know if it would solve everything. Honestly, I feel like media is one component of it. I feel like if we were going to try to reduce at least mass shootings that were committed by fame-seeking mass shooters. Mm-hmm. To me, I'm keep looking back at this trap. I'm hypothesizing the trap, but at the very least, I'm identifying some manipulable variables that would keep someone from going into that space to begin with. Because you and I have all heard of mass shootings on, and hearing names and knowing that they've been talked about for, weeks or months. We've heard that, but, I can't speak for y'all, but I'm not about to go commit a mass shooting, right? So we didn't engage in that behavior. We heard the same information, got the same media, are not going to go engage in that same behavior. And there's a reason for that, right? I think we're not stuck in that trap. I think we probably have good perspective taking skills. We're probably not super socially isolated, So I'd love to see more focus put on how do we change all of those contingencies so someone doesn't find themselves in that trap? Mm-hmm. Because, I can think of 3 mass shooters that were on just 8chan. That's one website. And so if you got, 95% of social media to post things appropriately, you'd only need a couple that would then become like, that's the hub, that's the source, that's where you're going to go. And you could try to track them down and maybe there could be prosecution, but if that's such a tall order, I mean, where are they? What country are they in? That becomes very, very hard. So it's not like the media influence isn't a good way to go. I'd love to see ways to break up behavior traps, to keep people from entering traps in the first place. And then if you find them that they do seem to be at risk, they do seem to be in a behavior trap, how can we implement interventions to try to break that up, get them out of it? We can teach better perspective taking, that we all learn to do it. And if someone didn't learn to do it, we can develop interventions and have developed interventions that teach you to take someone's perspective a little bit better. If you could do that, if let's say you implemented that as a sort of primary prevention, just say, hey, everybody, kindergartners, we're going to work on perspective taking. Whether you need it or not, whether you've got it or not, that's a thing that we work on. It's a thing that everybody benefits from. My suspicion is you would decrease a lot of social isolation, mm-hmm. because if you're better at perspective taking, you can, modulate your behavior in relation to somebody else's. You get along better. You have more friends. And if you got rid of the social isolation, then you don't have the internet as your only source of information whatsoever. You've got lots of varied sources of reinforcement that are pulling your behavior in a bunch of different directions. The media influence is an important part. I think it's just a part of it. And I think you could eliminate a lot of it. And I hope that would go a long way towards decreasing it. But I'd still want to see interventions that for the skill deficits and the experiences that people are having, that make it so that when they do learn these rules from the media, they learn them and respond the same way you and I do. Yes, I understand. My name will be more famous if I go commit a mass shooting than it is right now, but I'm not going to. Mm-hmm.
No, I certainly hear that, and you'd sort of be seeing that not necessarily as a reactive sort of plan, the perspective taking. It would be just something that we maybe make more of an effort of at earlier ages and throughout the developmental span. Not sort of like, hey, you're in your mid-20s and seem like your life's not going anywhere. Let's put you in perspective taking class. Maybe not being, perhaps, but I assume anyone who's willing to do a perspective taking class at that point in their life probably is, looking for help and is less likely to be a mass shooter because they realize something's not working out and they would like to see a change, versus it sounds like the pattern, the behavior trap the mass shooter would find themselves in.
Well, so in the paper, I suggest 3 interventions that are linked back to the analysis I provide, which are behavioral activation and acceptance and commitment training, and then training on perspective taking. And I think you could do those. You could do those, and in my perfect world, if I could press the button, it would just be a primary prevention. Everybody gets it. I think the world would be better if people knew how to better interact with negative thoughts that they have, how to not fall into traps of restricted reinforcement, and how to take someone else's perspective. I think everyone's better. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's reason to believe that you could do that as a primary prevention and not have it be just this huge societal upset. I mean, if you think, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the AIM curriculum, like what Accept, Identify, Move by Dixon. I mean, that's basically an ACT-based curriculum meant to go in for everybody in a school. That's a primary prevention, right? That is implementing ACT as a primary prevention for everybody. We're not waiting until we've identified these individuals that seem to be having a problem. Everybody gets this, whether things are going great or whether things are going rough. If things are going rough, you might need more, but everyone's going to get this. So you could do primary prevention, and I would love to see that. I think that would go a long way towards creating just a general better society. But you can also use it as more of a secondary prevention. This is all prevention because we're not doing anything. Once the mass shootings happened, it's happened and the person's in jail or they're dead. But you could also be identifying people that you think these people are at risk. And in my mind, that at risk is someone has entered that trap. Once they've entered that behavior trap and they're already socially isolated, they've been victimized, and there are EOs in place for negative reinforcement, and they're in the process of those interrelated contingencies that I was speaking of. To me, that's sort of like, that's where this person needs to be identified as at risk. And then the same interventions could be put in place, just a lot more focused. And there's ways, they're not perfect at all, but there are warning signs that let you think someone's at risk. We don't have to just go by a profile of, like, you're 20 and you're white and you're interested in guns, you might be a mass shooter, because that describes a lot of people.
Yes.
A lot of people. But most mass shooters, there is some leakage, like direct communication to other people, that something is going to happen that occurs before the event occurs. And, the FBI has a whole breakdown of like what are low risk threats, moderate risk threats, high risk. If someone says, "I hate y'all, I wish you were dead," that's probably a low risk threat, right? That's like, there's nothing specific. There's no detail to it. If someone said, I'm going to, I don't know, blow up the whole school. I mean, that's a little bit more detailed. It's not that plausible. If someone said, I'm going to go home, I'm going to get the rifle that I've got, and I could take all of y'all out, I could do that next week. I could do that tomorrow. That's a threat that is much more specific, that indicates, hey, take a better, closer look at this individual. Mm-hmm. And so one of the suggestions that I made, and other people have as well about these threats, is, if you had a better way of identifying threats, getting some inter-observer agreement to try to cut down on the sort of false positives that you mentioned, you could identify individuals that, whether they're going to be a mass shooter or not, could probably benefit from these same interventions, right? If this is, and there's other characteristics. If they're socially isolated, if you know that they have expressed in the past admiration for people who violently got even with their victimizer, like there's a bunch of different points that I've identified in the paper that together could help you separate out someone who is just saying, I wish they were dead, which we've all said, mm-hmm. but aren't going to act on it at all, from people that might be likely to act on it. And once you've identified those individuals, doesn't mean you have to arrest them, but you could go through and look for the same sort of contingencies that I was talking about. Like, have they been spending time doing this? And if so, at least, if you identified the manipulable variables, we know what we could do about it. We've got some suggestion of an intervention. So I think you could do it as primary prevention, where everybody gets this. And I think you could also have the same interventions as a secondary intervention or secondary prevention, where we're worried about this individual. Mm-hmm. Let's do some analysis. And, I provide a hypothetical or a theoretical analysis in my paper, but you could do the same sort of analysis in real time there. Look at these specific behavior patterns. Are you finding the same sort of contingencies at play? Do they seem like they have fallen into this behavior trap? Well, what do we do about it? Well, behavioral activation is an example of an intervention that helps take someone who's got a restricted response patterns and broadens it out to diffuse sources of reinforcement, which is what you would want.
Yeah. Well, James, you've convinced me. Let's move into the dissemination station and talk a little bit more about what's next for this line of research and this work.
Yeah. Well,
we're here.
There's a sound.
We had to disseminate to get to the station.
I'm suddenly thinking, why did we ever start doing the train sound effects?
Pulling into the station.
No, I get the conceit of our
Do you
sound
know why?
effect. Why?
It's because I told everyone about the commercial that made me cry from a long time ago.
And that was more recent. Did you do that
at the beginning too?
Ages and ages ago
long
too?
Time ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I just tried to board the train too early.
You just tried to jump on it, and I had to hold my hand out and pull you on.
Yeah.
And now we're in the cattle car, harmonicking, and with our bindles and all that good stuff. So James, like I said, I certainly at your talk, reading through the paper, talking to you today, all of these feel very much in line with, these seem like actionable steps. And you make it very clear that a lot of these are hypothetical. They make sense. That doesn't necessarily mean this is always what's happening. It's very specifically around the fame, potentially the fame-seeking shooters. However, you're also then describing a number of potential interventions that would be somewhat low cost. Some of them would probably be more costly, or at least require some larger response effort on the part of larger social groups, whether it's school systems choosing something like AIM for a social emotional learning curriculum, whether it would be media outlets or social media sort of looking more into their own policies and their education. But again, nothing that I think anyone would say, that's an awful idea and I hate it. Certainly a lot more palatable, I would think, than, all right, everybody, we're getting that Second Amendment out of there. That's going to, we know that won't solve the problem, but you can't have a mass shooting if it's really, really, really hard to get a gun. But that one's not going to fly, at least in this time. So everything else sounds very like, worst case scenario, maybe it doesn't change some of these patterns, but there's nothing negative about it. What's still sort of missing in terms of next steps? Is it more proof? Is it more just convincing policymakers? Like where do you kind of see the next steps being for this line of work?
Yeah. So the whole analysis that I put forward, which is, you've mentioned it, but I'm going to mention it too. It's just theoretical, right? It's a theoretical analysis based on empirical data, right?
Right.
It's an analysis that's based on precursor behaviors that have been identified. And whether my analysis is right or wrong, I certainly hope that it's right, and it logically makes sense to me. Identifying precursor behaviors, those sort of behavior relations, like people that are likely to do this are also likely to do that. I think even for behavior analysts, though that doesn't get to the level of influence, doesn't explain anything, just shows people that are likely to do this are likely to do that. I think that goes a long way towards helping us as behaviorists identify where to focus our analysis. Because we're not going to do a functional analysis on a mass shooting. It's right. We wouldn't be able to know exactly when it's going to happen, and it's going to happen one time, and there's no repeated analysis. So let's just take that one off the table. But those precursors,
right.
To me, that's where the money's at. That's where we should be focusing our attention. So the more data that's gathered on what are behaviors that people who ultimately end up committing a mass shooting, what are they doing along that process? That helps us where to know where to focus our analytic, efforts. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to see more precursors identified. The more, the better. The more specific, the better, because that's where we can analyze, and we can go beyond the theoretical analysis to a little bit more of an empirical analysis. So, I'm suggesting that there's this interaction between social isolation and increased, internet usage, and that behavioral activation could help break that up. I mean, that makes sense to me. There could be empirical research that shows that happens. And if you also have data to show that people that commit mass shootings are likely to do that in the first place, that tells us kind of where to go. That tells us what to do about it, and that tells us where to focus our attention. So I'd love to see other precursors identified. I would love to see clearer linkage between those precursors and the shooting behavior. So, the behavior trap I'm talking about, I would love to see data that suggested, there is a behavior trap in place. That what I'm suggesting, though, that's how those factors kind of combine. I would be interested in seeing that. And then that the actual empirical research, like behavioral activation, does it weaken that trap if we found it? And then whether we do, and whatever the intervention is, if it was any of the ones that I talked about, and whether they were done as primary prevention or secondary prevention, we need to have some sort of measure to show that the interventions are doing what we want. And I'd want to see, all of the interventions are designed at breaking up that pattern of precursor behavior before the mass shooting. So we'd certainly want to see a decrease in the mass shooting. We also want to see that there is a breakup in those precursor behaviors, the patterns of precursor behaviors, or if it was done as a primary intervention, that those never emerge in the first place. And I feel like that is the primary one wouldn't necessarily be the easiest, because you'd have to identify exactly what is it we're looking to not see develop. But we'd want to have some sort of confirmation that these interventions, whatever they are having the effect. Mm-hmm. So that's where I'd love to see, more research in general, both within the field of behavior analysis and outside of it.
Oh, so sadly, still more to come for this real, tragic social ill. And hopefully we'll continue to see more work. I mean, I assume you're going to be continuing to research in this area even after some of these other papers, or are you sort of moving on yourself?
Well, I definitely plan to continue with this, with the topic. I have a hard time. I have a hard time staying on one topic. Mm-hmm. And so I've got another paper on psilocybin and psilocybin-assisted therapy. And I have to rein myself in. I have a tendency to be like, I want to drop all of this, and I want to focus on that.
Bruce Canary in fashion.
Yeah.
But I've really enjoyed this topic, so I know I'm not going to abandon it. I think it's important, and it allows me to still kind of do the same thing. And again, what I really like, I feel like I talked in the beginning about these other researchers that are non-behavioral and why it only leads to prediction. I'd love to see more collaboration between us and them, because again, they're telling us where to analyze, and then we're providing the analysis to the level of influence. So I know when I was talking about this paper with other non-behavioral researchers, it was a real hard time. I had a real hard time changing my language so that they understood my analysis. And so I'd like to spend some time there trying to figure out how can I explain this to them in a way that makes sense to them, so that we've got more people both within and outside of our field working together.
It does seem like a very fruitful area for that type of collaboration as you described. So I hope that can continue.
I hope so too.
Well, Dr. James Meindl, thank you so much for coming on the show today and for sharing so much about this topic that was not on any of our radar until we got to see you speak at BABAT. So we're very glad we had a chance to get a little bit more in depth and look at some of the research and have you explain some of the more complicated pieces to us. We really appreciate that opportunity. If folks would like to reach out to kind of ask questions about this work or to contact you about it, or maybe they have some ideas or areas they want to help continue moving the baton along in this field, is there a place that they could contact you?
Yeah, so I'm at the University of Memphis in the Applied Behavior Analysis program. I'm happy to share out my email. Email is fine. I don't know. Yeah. So my email is jnmeindl@memphis.edu. And yeah, I love talking about this topic, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody about it.
Excellent. Once more, we all want to say a big thanks to Dr. James Meindl for coming on the show and talking about this very, very important topic. I think I've said it like 70 times at this point, but seeing him at BABAT was just one of those, we got to do an episode on this. We can't go a whole BABAT cycle without it. So we're very happy to have him on in our guest month, wrapping up our guest month, which is always a fun time where we have lots of different topics. If you'd said at the beginning of July that we would cover so many varied topics in 1 month, I would have said, I don't think we can do it, but we did. And a lot of it thanks to our
called you a liar.
Special guests. Wrap it up with Dr. Meindl. We also want to give a couple other thanks, but before that, let's do the last section of the show, pairings. Diana, take it away.
All right, it is time for pairings. Pairings is the part of the show where I tell you about past episodes that you might want to check out if you found this one interesting. Now, as we told you at the top here, we have never talked about this topic before, so I don't have anything that is directly related.
So 0 episodes.
Initially I was like, maybe we won't do pairings, but as I thought about it some more, there are certainly some things that could be related. So first and foremost, this is like a branch out episode. And so you might want to go back and listen to episode 211, where we talked to Dr. Matt Normand about variety in ABA, because this would definitely fall into the variation category. But then from there, we also kind of in the latter half of this episode got into some more protection factors or possible protection factors. So as it related to that, I do have a few suggestions. We have episode 121, where we talked about child welfare with Dr. Jim Carr. Episode 102, where we talked about PBIS, positive behavioral interventions and supports. Episode 127, perspective taking. Episode 75, ACT with Dr. Adam Haas. And episode 282, Protection Factors in Trauma-Informed Practice with Dr. Camille Kalu. So you could go back and check those out. I also like to recommend a snack to enjoy while you're listening to these past episodes. And here, I didn't want to do anything cutesy, but I will just tell you this. When we had break, I went upstairs to check on the children. One of them was in the bathtub eating watermelon.
Like taking a bath, or he was just sitting in the bathtub?
Yeah. Yep. He took the whole big bowl of watermelon in the bathtub and was eating it. Oh. So your snack today is watermelon in the bathtub.
That sounds gross.
You do you.
I don't want to eat. I want to take a bath and get out. No thanks.
It's hot outside. That was his solution. So there you go. That was pairings. Please enjoy.
All right. Thanks, Diana. And thank you all so much for listening to ABA Inside Track. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We'd love it if you join us online at abainsidetrack.com, where you can find links to all of the articles we discuss today in our episodes, as well as to find previous episodes. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to get your podcasts. You could leave us a review. We'd really appreciate that. You can even join us for extra content on our Patreon page, patreon.com/ABAinsidetrack, where you can subscribe at any level. But at the $5 level, you're able to access our listener choice episodes and vote on those episodes every season, once a season, and get an extra kind of behind the scenes video that goes along with those, as well as a free CE. At the $10 enough level, you're able to access our 2-hour-long book club discussions. We do one of those a season as well. You get those a whole year before everybody else. And you get 2 CEs as well as a thanks from us for being a subscriber. Again, that's patreon.com/ABAinsidetrack. Or just join at the free level and just kind of see some of the posts and get everything a little early and get to join in some of the polls. We love to see you there no matter how you get there. We love to see it. Some final thanks. Some thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro, outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for an amazing editing work. And before we forget, thanks to Dr. Meindl for our second secret code word. It is behavior trap. BEHAVIOR space TRAP. A behavior trap, much like a parent trap. You don't want to get stuck in one unless it's a good behavior trap, but sometimes they're not. And you don't know if it is or not until you're in it. So be careful. Behavior trap.
Ooh, we really think you're swell.
Oh, Haley Mills, thanks for joining us in the studio. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.